From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery.
Hi everyone, this is Paul Bryson, your host and web editor of JAMA Oto, and I'm delighted today to be joining you for a special episode highlighting the American Head and Neck Society meeting at the Combined Otolaryngology Spring Meetings here in Chicago. I have a special co-host for the podcast today. It's Dr. Samir Khariwala. He serves as the chairman of the University of Minnesota Department of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery. He is also our deputy editor for JAMA Oto. Today, I am pleased to tell you that I have been at the Combined Otolaryngology Spring Meetings and have looked with enthusiasm at the American Head and Neck Society program. In a few moments, you're going to hear about a very diverse and representative program from the American Head and Neck Society. We will hear from the program chairs. That's going to be Dr. Patrick Ha, Professor of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery and Chief of Head and Neck Oncologic Surgery at the University of California, San Francisco. His program co-chairs Dr. Sidharth Puram, who is Associate Professor of Otolaryngology and Genetics and Chief of Head and Neck Surgery at the Washington University in St. Louis, as well as Dr. Nicole Schmitt. She is Associate Professor of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery at Emory University. And when we hear from them, you're going to see this program covers current data, past data, and puts the current standard of care for head and neck oncology into clear focus. It's been a great program. It's been multidisciplinary with medical and radiation oncologists participating, but I'll let them share some of these highlights with you in a few moments. Before I turn it over to Dr. Khariwala, I also wanted to highlight some of the articles that were presented this week at the AHNS meeting at COSM. You can also find them in our pages here in JAMA Oto or at JAMA Otolaryngology online. There are two articles looking at papillary thyroid carcinoma. The first is looking at the outcomes of conversion surgery for patients with low-risk papillary thyroid carcinoma. There's also an article on this topic involving active surveillance and conversion surgery for low-risk thyroid cancer. One other article involves oropharyngeal cancer staging and looking at a popular topic, artificial intelligence, using artificial intelligence for record extraction in this particular paper. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Khariwala, and I'd like to formally welcome our guests. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Paul. I also want to thank Patrick Ha, Nicole Schmitt, and Sid Puram for being here and for the incredible effort I'm sure they must have had to put on such a wonderful meeting. I'm sure it was exhausting and time-consuming, but I think the outcome was really exceptional. So maybe I'll just start with Patrick. Can you describe to me what your overall goals were for setting up the meeting and how you structured it? I really felt like the agenda was diverse in terms of the topics, as well as the speakers and where they came from, and also the career stage of the speakers. So I really felt like we had a broad and diverse representation in multiple ways.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Samir, and thanks, Paul, for having us on this program today. So I guess the first thing to start with was, the tagline or the headline of the meeting was catalyzing practice change through translational clinical research. And we actually looked through many of the previous, sessions or meetings to look at what that meant and to put that in context. And, our goal was to stick with what we thought was important, all as surgeon scientists, and to also reflect that of our president, Bob Ferris, as to what we felt would be important and kind of cutting edge for this particular meeting. So I think, as you mentioned, part of our goal is to not only cover what was in the past, but to really highlight what we saw as kind of either present day novel changes, but also looking towards the future and thinking about what's the next step for clinical research, translational research, and clinical care. So to do that, we really had to bring in a lot of outside speakers. You saw from the keynotes, as well as the multidisciplinary teams from other areas. We thought that was important to include them pretty heavily in this meeting. And then from a format standpoint, you're right that we really took time to select the speakers. The program committee did a great job in helping with that. But to think about representation all throughout, including where they came from, their particular backgrounds, the areas of expertise, and even their career stage. So we felt all that was important. We did our best to cram that into 2 days worth of meetings. So we hope that we were successful in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really were. I mean, everyone I bumped into, myself included, just really enjoyed the meeting, and it had a really different flavor to it, which I think was really nice. So maybe we'll move on to Nikki. In terms of the keynote addresses that happened on Wednesday, how did you all go about choosing those speakers? What were you looking for? And what did you think were the main takeaways from the keynote addresses?
Well, I think it was an interesting choice of speakers, and I think our president, Bob Ferris, had some longstanding connections with all of them, but we wholeheartedly agreed that they were great choices. Dr. Womack really set off the meeting by just talking about his very prolonged career trajectory and how he moved from being not only a surgeon, but really a clinical trialist, and how the field of surgical oncology in general, not just the head and neck cancer, has really moved into more data-based rather than anecdotal. And he was a fantastic orator, and everyone really just enjoyed his talk first thing in the morning. That really set a nice atmosphere for the stage. And then Dr. McCary talking about some of the challenges that we have had with ballooning costs of healthcare, and really some thought-provoking ideas and data from his recent books, just talking about how things got to be that way and what could potentially be done about it. So I thought that was also very compelling. And then finally, the following day, Dr. Lowy, who has a long track record in dealing with human papillomavirus, and from a virology standpoint, from a cancer standpoint, and really enabling the vaccine. So it was really fascinating to hear about how all that came about and the latest data, where all that is going. So I think that really set the stage for what the three of us and our president wanted to emphasize, which was this translational thing from the bench all the way up to the clinical trial.
Yeah, the thing that really struck me, the talk on business and medicine, there was a lot of discussion about data and what kind of data actually gets published. And he gave several examples of paradigms that have been created, oftentimes under false pretenses, which I think was really eye-opening for the audience to understand the health impact and the financial impact from some of these, in hindsight, mistakes, and how they've persisted in our dogma, I guess.
Yeah, I also thought that was, compelling, and using a lot of examples outside of our field that really everyone in medicine is familiar with. I thought that was fantastic.
And Sid, well, I guess all three of you as surgeon investigators, it's a really important time for all of you to lead a meeting like this when things like immunotherapy and circulating markers of disease are becoming such a prominent topic in our specialty. What would you say were your takeaways that you felt were most prominent with regard to immunotherapy that came out during this meeting in terms of the new science?
That's a great question. As you point out, immunotherapy is rapidly emerging as a key pillar of treatment in head and neck cancer. And so that was something really important for us to cover. And actually, the paradigms of immunotherapy treatment are now broadening to thinking about it before surgery in a neoadjuvant setting versus after surgery in the recurrent metastatic setting. So we felt it was important to cover both of those contexts, and actually we're able to establish a panel of experts, including radiation and medical oncologists, to cover that topic. With regards to the neoadjuvant paradigm, we had a very nice panel looking at treatment with immunotherapy, both for mucosal head and neck cancer as well as cutaneous squamous cell carcinoma, with additional insights from Dr. Sossman, who's a world's leading expert in melanoma immunotherapy. And in carrying forward with the theme of the keynote that Dr. Womack set up that Nikki alluded to, was sort of this idea of, well, other people have sort of done many of these things before us. And if anything, on head and neck, we're a little bit behind the eight ball. So what can we learn from Dr. Womack's experience with breast cancer? What can we learn from Dr. Sossman's experience with melanoma? And so I think that this really highlights the advantages of bringing in outside experts and also learning from other disease sites, so we can get head and neck really, in a way, caught up to the rest of oncology. And I think that was one of the key things we wanted to do through some of the sessions.
That's great. And how about circulating markers, Nikki? What did you think was the biggest takeaway from the meeting with regard to using, these new technologies to either detect or determine treatment efficacy or outcomes, recurrence, etc.?
I think a lot of the new material we saw this year, both in abstracts and within the sessions, were just different ways of using it. Instead of just using single or a second commercial vendor, just looking at it in a lot of different ways, and next generation sequencing, and looking at not just blood, but saliva, and the accuracy of using ctDNA rather than imaging for detecting recurrence. So I think there was a lot of new, exciting material there that wasn't necessarily incremental, but I think there's a lot coming in that space.
The other thing I might kind of tack onto that is I feel like in the past, these circulating tumor sessions have been a little bit of shock and awe. Oh my gosh, we might be able to detect a cancer 10 years early. Oh my gosh, we might be able to see a recurrence 6 months earlier. But actually, this meeting felt a little different. It didn't feel like it was just focused on the pure observation that the technology is there, but rather on really getting down to the details of which platforms are actually effective and what's the data behind it. And actually, it was fun for me, at least, to see some of the questions being posed, really pinning down some of the speakers to say, well, what's really the data that shows that this was helpful? And on the heels of Dr. Macary's talk, just talking about things that get ahead of themselves without the data, it felt very salient and relevant in this context as well.
Yeah, I think I saw the exact same thing that you did, which was some report of going backwards and finding circulating tumor DNA present 10 years before a diagnosis. And it just raised a ton of questions for me. Like, how are we going to manage this in the future if somebody shows up with circulating tumor DNA and no obvious sign of cancer, and that this is going to be happening on a semi-regular basis, assuming that this continues in the future? So really lots of interesting questions with this new technology. Patrick, speaking of new technology, the meeting highlighted all kinds of new approaches and new technologies. Can you talk about how you chose which ones to highlight and what you took away from that in terms of what things are most exciting?
Yeah, I mean, again, with such a limited footprint, our hands are a little bit tied. We wish we could have spent more time talking about the various robotic technologies, like we talked, the molecular technologies being used currently for detection, imaging, and all sorts of other aspects. So we did kind of throw that into one or two sessions and sprinkled some other abstracts and things like that into the program. But I think that these are sort of age-old topics, what's kind of new and emerging. And I think that largely what we're doing was, giving updates for areas that we felt were kind of ongoing. For example, robotic or distance thyroid access procedures that are already being used, but, more of a critical analysis. And then maybe, and like we talked about these new molecular technologies, thinking about what's happening currently in different programs and places. And then that, I think, sets the stage for the following meetings to come as to giving these updates. And so, again, it was an update, but also kind of a new platform for things that we hope to hear about more in the future.
That's great. And then I guess I just have one more question, which should be for all three of you. One thing I felt that was a little bit different again about this meeting was a little bit more focus on career-related topics, mentorship, things like that, which I think is wonderful to have at this meeting. It's great to have the science, but also speak to and allow the senior folks in the society to talk about their experiences. And so the panel put on by the Women in Head Neck Surgery section was really well attended, I thought. And I was just curious as to what you were hoping to achieve with that one. I felt like it was a new flavor to the meeting, and I think it really added breadth to the program.
Well, I have to say for that one, we have to give all the credit to the women's section of H&S, who actually gets together every year and puts together the panel on their own. We give them some time and carte blanche, and so we can't take credit for that. But I think they always do put together something very insightful, and I do like that they did that this year. And the advice they gave was just very practical, pragmatic. Here was my experience. Here's what went well. Here's what didn't go well, and tips going forward. And they got a nice, diverse panel with different backgrounds. So I thought that was an excellent thing that perhaps in our excitement for the science, we hadn't covered as well in other sessions. But I did see just a flavor, as you mentioned, of some of the senior people in their other sessions that were science related, just kind of mentioning some of their pitfalls in the past, which I thought was very useful.
And also along those lines, the fact that they've now culminated with the Margaret Butler Award, handing off to Carol Bradford, very well deserved this year, as a staunch example of what mentorship can be like. I thought that was a really nice representation of that. And I'm glad that that award is now within our society and that it will continue.
The other aspect of mentorship that was kind of nice was, I think, frankly, a lot of people admire and look up to our now past president, Bob Ferris, and he's done so much for our field. And I was really struck by, in his talk, just how much time he spent discussing what he thought were retrospectively things that made him successful. And it actually wasn't really all that complicated. It was things like showing up, being committed, making sure you don't prioritize clinical completely over advancing the field and research, whatever that means to any given person. And I thought hearing that from someone who's been very successful set a really good tone for the meeting in terms of, we're here to talk about these topics. We're starting small and we have to grow. And it's through this persistent discussion and passion for advancement that we can really make our field better and all kind of emulate things that Dr. Ferris has shown us is possible.
I do like that he did that also, Sid, in that he really geared it to everyone, not just to folks who spend half their time doing science as we do, but just kind of encouraging everyone to the extent that they have the bandwidth and the interest to engage in some degree of the scientific method and ask probing questions and try to discover new ways of doing things. So I thought that was a nice thing as well.
Well, great. I'm going to hand it back over to Paul. I just want to commend all three of you on really putting on an incredibly successful meeting. Like I said, a really diverse program. I think anybody who came away with lots of new information and things to think about. So congratulations to you and everyone who worked on it.
Yeah, no, it's been really great. And, just looking through the program, it really is exciting. It sort of captures so many different aspects of head and neck oncology and the process.
One good thing is that all the abstracts that were orals, which really were fantastic this year, will likely be published between JAMA Otolaryngology or other journals in the near future. So that's a great opportunity to kind of see what came out of the meeting. And I think one thing that was fun for us is that we decided to integrate the most highly meritorious abstracts into some of the main sessions. So we actually had med students and residents presenting alongside leaders in the field. And I think that did two things. One, it gave people an opportunity to present, which was a really unique opportunity. But secondly, it allowed some of these talks that by definition are kind of more focused on exactly what's the rigorous data behind a given topic to be supplemented with something that might be a bit more preliminary, but give you a sense of what might be coming down the pipeline in terms of new approaches, new technologies, new ways of looking at things.
Could I highlight one last thing?
Of course.
Yeah, so one thing I thought would be really nice to feature also was that the pre-meeting courses, again, not really our doing, but a lot of work and energy went through the organizers. So Jose Zavaios and Puram Sumer put on a novel kind of first time ever workshop on entrepreneurship, which was really well received. Lots of outside speakers, but for people thinking about starting a company or have an idea, think about patents, they covered a broad array of topics that I hope they'll continue to do. Jamie Koo and Steve Chin put on a reconstruction course. So this was an afternoon course geared mostly towards residents and fellows. But actually, as it turns out, I think for the speakers, they learned a lot from each other. So it was a nice way to cover the really complex topic of microvascular reconstruction in an afternoon. So a little more laid back, a lot of cases, a lot of videos. So again, something we hope that they will continue to put on. And then lastly, Russ Smith and Lisa Orloff put on the thyroid ultrasound course, which is a certification course that was very well attended, but to continue to teach the members of our society and those throughout the skills of ultrasound. So I thought that, kudos to those three groups. I mean, something that really added more flavor in a more open environment and through the pre-meeting courses.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you highlighting that. It seems like great opportunities to interact, but then also even on the topics of entrepreneurship to kind of think outside of the silo and think about ways that you can engage with, people outside of our traditional networks to maybe bring ideas forward. Well, as we wind down, just wanted to thank you for taking the time, all of our guests today to share your experience with the meeting and highlight these. We look forward to next year's meeting already.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thanks so much, Paul and Samir.
This episode was produced by Daniel Musisi at the JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com. Thanks for listening.